You don't want to end up like the spokesman for Subway, do you?
Did you just use a term that excludes women from an occupation?
Okay, let's back up.
Ah! Did you just say spokesman instead of spokesperson when women are just as capable of selling sandwiches as anyone? Are you purposefully trying to use words that assert your male privilege?
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. There's a recent article on Polygon from Graham McMillan, who's a known... he's a gaslighter. He likes to get people's blood boiling with really clickbaity, rage-baity headlines. It's one of the reasons he was removed from the Hollywood. What is it? The Hollywood Reporter, when they had the Heat, whatever that thing is, talks about comic books. He was fired from there for a reason. He's got this article in there, and the big headline is Karen Berger saying comics aren't just for straight white boys anymore. And obviously, it did incite a little bit of rage. We're talking about it right here. Obviously, with me is my good friend from the Comic Writing 101 stream, comic book writer, Mark Pellegrini. How you doing?
I'm doing good, and I guess so is that writer, because hey, I mean, he writes that crap and it works, I guess. Because I read that article, like, wow, I'm gonna go throw up now.
Well, hey, at least the Hollywood Reporter had enough class to be like, yeah, it's time to move on from this guy.
That's right. Polygon's really always hiring.
Fit our brand, but he does fit the Polygon brand. So there's a few key quotes in here, and it's from the 35 Years of Dark Horse Past and Present panel, where they're talking, about the history of Dark Horse Comics, where they're going in the future. Karen Berger, who used to be the head honcho behind Vertigo when it first kicked off, now does Berger Books at Dark Horse. Apparently, they're going to stop doing comic books. They're going to go straight to a graphic novel model. And there's a bunch of other stuff that was presented in there. But there's the one line in this article that got everyone talking. It's when she says, it's not just straight white boy comics anymore. And I thought this was quite hypocritical coming from Karen Berger. So here's one time, hey, you gotta let me get my point out.
Sorry.
So at one time, she was in charge of Vertigo. Like, if you wanted a book published on Vertigo, you went through Karen Berger. And she had the opportunity to affect change. So it wasn't just straight white boy comics anymore. Yeah. And she only hired, at the time, straight white men from England. We do know now, I believe, that Grant Morrison is non-binary. But at the time, believed to be straight white boy comic book writer. She could have affected change, but now she's talking about it when she's no longer in a position at DC Comics where she could have said that when she had the opportunity to do something, she didn't do shit. Right,
and you made the point that I wanted to make, and that's why you didn't let me interrupt you, is that she's talking like a politician, that the old 75-year-old politician who's running for a president or a higher office, like, I'm going to affect change, I'm going to do this and do that. Like, you have been in office for 45 years, sir or ma'am. Why haven't you done it yet? And so we're hearing Karen Berger saying, like, comics aren't just for straight white boys anymore. Like, you have been in office at comics since the 1980s. Why haven't you done that yet? Why is it just now that you're going to suddenly affect that change? What weren't you doing for the past 30 years that you were working? And that's what this entire article reads. It reads more like a political article than a comic book article, which I guess they're one and the same now because they all read that way. But it's like Karen, what haven't you been doing for the past 3 decades that you're suddenly going to start doing now that will make this change? And honestly, when it comes to Karen Berger and her even her golden age at Vertigo, her whole point of founding Vertigo as a spin-off of DC Comics was that DC Comics it started with Swamp Thing by Alan Moore, where Swamp Thing had to have a mature reader's stamp put on the cover, and Alan Moore didn't like that, and that was one of the things that made him want to leave Swamp Thing, quit that book, and do other things. So DC spun out this imprint called Vertigo that was their mature reader's imprint, and Karen Berger was, behind that. And there's a lot of good books that came out of Vertigo. I'm not going to pretend like their books suck. They're good. The thing is that Vertigo was supposed to be this mature reader's line for people who wanted something different, right? They didn't just want the usual cape and superhero books. They wanted something unique and special and a whole lot of different variety books for, different tastes. And all Karen Berger published through Vertigo were books by British people writing deconstructionist stories about superhero comics. Neil Gaiman, Alan Moore, Grant Morrison, and he's not British, but he's Irish, Mark Millar. And
Garth Ennis.
Yeah, Garth Ennis, he's also Irish. But it's all just these Great Britain or United Kingdom writers all writing deconstructionist stories about superheroes. There wasn't really that variety that she promoted. I honestly think that she just thought that European accents, particularly British and Irish, were hot. And so if you had an accent, she would hire you. She would assume you were sophisticated because you had an accent, when all they were doing were writing the same kinds of stories, deconstructionist superhero fiction. And it's all just falls into this miasma of just being the same old thing, which is what she founded Vertigo to, combat against, was that, DC Comics are just this miasma of superhero books. I'm going to go make another miasma of deconstructionist superhero books by British authors, and it's all just going to feel samey. And she gets so much clout and so much respect. Just looking at this article, I'm quoting the article here. One of the most important figures in mainstream U.S. comics, editor Karen Berger, and also he goes on to say, Berger held court about her history in the industry. These really just complimentary, just fawning over and kissing her feet, when all she did was just hire a bunch of British people to write the same kinds of deconstructionist stories. And those comics are fine. They're good. Sandman and Hellblazer. And then, of course, Swamp Thing continued on even after Alan Moore left, and there's great stories by Rick Veitch. Yeah, but it's all just kind of the same thing. And no one ever talks about the damage that spinning those characters off into Vertigo actually did to the narratives of DC Comics. So Swamp Thing and John Constantine. Oh.
We're getting too far off topic. This is only going to be a 25-minute video.
I'm ranting here.
Let's get back on topic. One of my issues with what she says, where it's not just straight white boy comics anymore, is she's almost taking away agency from comic readers that weren't white or straight or were female, as if comic books, until within the last few years, there was a sign, that says, whites only on it, or straight whites only. That's never been the case.
No.
Comic books were diverse before almost every other form of entertainment were diverse.
You go back to the 1950s, right? So after the golden age of superheroes ended with World War II, and superheroes weren't in vogue anymore, comics had to hit different genres. The best-selling comics in the 1950s, between the golden age of superheroes and the silver age of superheroes, were genre books. Horror comics, like EC was putting out. Western comics were huge, but the one that everyone neglects is romance comics, targeted at girls and women. And Stan Lee even wrote a whole bunch of those. And that was a huge market. Archie comics were huge with girls because they were funny, but they were also about romance, the will they, won't they, And with Archie, girls read a lot of comics back in the 50s. She's not breaking new ground by suddenly saying that women are reading comics now. Women read tons of manga. There's so much manga out there that is focused on girls. And there are cartoons out there, like Sailor Moon's been around since the 80s and the 90s, and that's girls' cartoons, like Witch and Winx Club and all those spin-offs. It's nothing new. She's not breaking new ground. She's acting like she's breaking a glass ceiling that was broken half a century ago. But the mainstream media, like this article, is just like applauding her and bowing to her when she hasn't actually done anything. Not anything truly trailblazing and innovative. Not when
she had the opportunity. She could have done it, made some change, but she didn't. And she made her own status quo and just took it forward.
And heck, she's taking credit away from the actual trailblazer. She's saying that these comics aren't just for straight white boys anymore. And now let's put the emphasis on the whites. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were Dwayne McDuffie. She's like Milestone Comics back in the 90s, an entire imprint that was with African-American creators writing books specifically targeting African-American readers. That was a trailblazing series of books back in the day. And she's saying that it just doesn't count. It didn't matter. Like what she's doing
Power
now.
Man in the 70s.
Yes. Yeah, and Power Man go back to the 70s. I mean, geez, there was actually Golden Age comics that were targeting black readers with black creators back in the day. I mean, but she's acting like none of that ever happened. That Dwayne McDuffie and Static Shock and Milestone just never happened. Power Man never happened. She's the first one to make comics that aren't for white boys anymore. It's just like, get over yourself. And you've been in the industry for 40 years. If you haven't enacted the change that you want to change by now, you're just a politician that's been selling lies, and this is just the next one that you're selling. And quite frankly, she's tilting at windmills. She's fighting something that doesn't exist. Comics have been for girls and for homosexuals or non-binary, whatever you want to call them, and for minorities, for African Americans, for Hispanics, for everybody else. Those books have been out there for decades, close to a century. To act like she's suddenly now putting these things out there that just have never existed before is just total nonsense.
It's the weirdest thing about the comic book industry is it's their idea, because they've just all of a sudden they're ashamed of themselves because I guess there's too many white heroes, or maybe there's too many white creators. And I've said all the time, hey, I want diversity in comics. If there's a way that you can bring in the next generation of comic writers, we can have more minority comic writers that are ready, that want to come into the profession, I'm all for it. But I mean, just to gaslight your audience because somehow all of a sudden you're ashamed of yourself and you want to just put your readers on blast as if it's their fault that you were creating these books. It's not the comic readers that were sitting there and hiring the writers and everything. It was people like Karen Berger that were doing that.
So this is a quote from Karen that's in that article. She says, "I gravitated toward comics that weren't male power fantasies." And she's using that derisive language of male power fantasies. Like there's something specifically wrong with stories that target male audiences and give them what they want to read. If comics are truly for everybody includes straight white males or straight males or just males in general who want to read comics that appeal to them. Now we're getting so much media now that's so subversive. We're like, oh, Star Wars isn't just that's a male power fantasy. It's going to be about Rey Skywalker. Or you get the new He-Man cartoon on Netflix by Kevin Smith. That's like, oh, He-Man is the ultimate male power fantasy. We're going to deconstruct that and we're going to make it about Tila. And we're going to take that away from all you boys and man babies out there. Like, if you're truly devoted to the idea that comics are for everyone, then why do you want to take comics away from someone? Like, why do you want to take them away from like males and target them towards females? Take them away from heterosexuals and target them towards transgenders and homosexuals. Take them away from white people and target them towards black people by like race swapping all these characters, like Batgirl apparently in the new TV show or movies. It's like, what part of everyone somehow doesn't include straight white males or whatever have you? Why even get caught up on that, Mark? Because it's bullshit. You shouldn't even say, the just straight white boy comics. The idea on itself is a fucking lie. You shouldn't even entertain it. And that's one of these logical fallacies. When they put stuff out like there for you, Mark, it's for you to zone in on that and go on a 10-minute rant about, why wouldn't you want to market to? It's bullshit to begin with. They weren't just for straight white comics. That's the thing too, is it's the writer of this article, like as you point out, he's intentionally being divisive, and I feel, like I am falling for it hook, line, and sinker, by coming out and talking about it. Like, why am I doing this? I'm giving him exactly. It's good to talk about it, but you've gone down the path of, well, why can't I be included? Everybody was already included. Exactly. And I think that's why manga and anime is doing so well. Yes. Is that it is 100% inclusive. Do you know how popular Dragon Ball Z is, not just in America, among the African American consumer population in America? It is huge in Central and South America. They all love Goku. Everybody of every color and every race loves Goku because the content of his character speaks to them. The idea of training hard and loving your family and sacrificing everything for the people that you love, for your world, and to make the world a better place. And that's what Superman stood for, or he used to. That's what Captain America stood for, or he used to. But these characters used to speak to everyone, and there was no question about the color of their skin or their sexuality or these things about them. But now these kinds of media topics have intentionally created this sort of division where now we have to go on the offensive to defend He-Man and his masculinity, or to defend comic books and people like Karen Berger who are assassinating the idea of the male power fantasy, or saying that comics aren't just for straight white males anymore, when that was never the case. Like I said, tilting at windmills. Now all of a sudden we have to go on the defensive for an argument that never existed until they created it out of thin air and put us on the defensive. And it's all so tiresome, and
that's why we're seeing the decline in interest in North American comic books, because that's all they're interested in. They're only interested in surface traits, ethnicity, race, sexual orientation, and things of those things. Just everything that divides the character, and they never concentrate on what makes the character great anymore. They're just continuously telling you what makes the character different. It's just driving people away, and there's an alternative there. There's manga just sitting right there. Guess what they don't do? They don't care about any of that stuff. All their characters are Japanese. Who gives a fuck? Do you like the character or don't you? And people are turning over in droves because they're tired of this bullshit. It's not just comic books. It's all of entertainment. No one wants to be pandered to, and certainly no one wants to be told that they're evil, or somehow they've had this entire space in themselves because of their race or their sexual orientation or their religion or anything like that, because it's never been the case.
No,
anybody could go and read a comic book that wanted to read a comic book. There are plenty of Latino, Black, Asian, and other minority readers. There are plenty of female readers. There are plenty of gay readers. There are plenty of all across the spectrum of LGBTQ+, and there always have been. And these are fucking lies, and people keep going into it. But the industry itself has bought into it. That's the problem, Mark. And they bought in it to such a degree that they will drive every fucking buddy away by the time it's all over, because that is their mantra now. That is their religion, is what they believe to their very core, is that we have to point out, we need to segregate everybody by everything rather than putting out the best characters that everybody can love.
And what really ticks me off too is that it's not like this is new blood who's seeping. There's a lot of younger people who are seeping into the industry and doing stuff like this, like Mariko Tamaki and folks like that. But Karen Berger is not new blood. She is an old school DC editor, and she's feeding into this. She's talking about wanting to create greater inclusivity when the language and the rhetoric she uses is all about exclusivity. It's all about breaking people apart.
She was working at Vertigo when they had openly transsexual creators and transsexual characters in their books.
Exactly.
In the 90s.
Back in the 90s, like we talk about are we supposedly less accepting now than we were in the 90s? Because back in the 90s, when talking Marvel Comics, like when North Star was gay, I think that goes back to the 80s when North Star was gay of Alpha Flight. And it was like, okay, he's just a gay character. Who cares? That's just part of his personality and who he is. That's part of his backstory. And we just accepted that.
Can you imagine if they launched the character nowadays? That would be the only thing they ever said about it.
Hell, that's they're taking characters who were never those things, like Iceman, and making that their defining characteristic.
Yes. When
did Iceman suddenly start talking and acting like John Waters? The very instant Brian Michael Bendis said he's gay. Now he's not just gay, he's super gay, and he just acts like the most stereotypical character possible. And if a character, one of their aesthetic qualities, and it was simply an aesthetic quality, was just that they're black, like Storm. And then, or Black Panther, and then just suddenly, now the only thing that matters about Power Man or Luke Cage is that they're black. What's his personality? Black. What does he like? Black things. What's his favorite music? Black music. The only thing about them is that. And it's the same thing. This character is gay, North Star, what's his personality? Gay. What's his favorite things? Gay things. What's his favorite food? Gay food. The only thing that matters is that one character trait. We're taking these multifaceted characters that felt like actual human beings because they had so many dimensions to them, and we're narrowing them down to a stereotype just so that we can target them towards that one singular market. That's exclusivity. Inclusivity is having a character that feels like a flesh and blood human being because they have so many different dimensions to them. Exclusivity is narrowing them down to a singular trait so you can market them towards one potential audience. You're taking them away from the entire grander scheme of audiences just so you can market towards the one. And that's so narrow-minded and so obnoxious, but that's the way things are being done right now. When in the past, it just didn't matter. Like Smithers on The Simpsons was gay for the longest time, and he still is, but that wasn't his one personality trait. It was a running gag that he was in love with Mr. Burns, but just episodes and episodes and episodes of Smithers where he just has all these other things going on where he likes Malibu Stacy, and that's how he connects with Lisa. He's one of those like bosses that's always like leaning over, a micromanager who's leaning over your shoulder, and that's his connection to Homer. His being gay was just one running gag of a lot of different gags about Smithers. But it's in somewhere in like the 2000s, the 2010s, that's been all Smithers has been in The Simpsons is gay. It's just one gay joke after another, and he's just gay, gay, gay. That's his personality. It's like he used to be so much more than that. It's kind of like when the term flanderizing comes from The Simpsons, because Ned Flanders used to have a whole lot of different things about him until the writers decided to focus on just the fact that he was very Christian, and now that's all he does is be Christian. His personality type is Christian. His favorite things are Christian things. His favorite food is Christian food. And it's like that. They should call it smitherizing, where they take a character, decide that they're gay, and then focus only on that aspect of them. But that's the way we write characters in so much Western media now. That's the way we devolve and we narrow down characters in Western media now.
And that's Karen how they're driving people away.
Exactly.
It's the marketing. It's the way that they're presenting the characters because they're not relatable anymore. Who wants?
No one's personality
making the characters so narrow that only the smallest group of people would ever want to read about their stories anymore.
The most obnoxious people. It's like those people we make fun of because like, someone who's a vegan, and the first thing they tell you when they introduce themselves to you is like, hi, by the way, I'm vegan. You know, their entire personality is vegan, or their entire personality is like, I'm a cyclist. They're like, okay, these people are obnoxious. You don't want to be friends with them, and you loathe even having to be like in a room with them for 5 minutes because they're so narrow and so insubstantial and annoying. Why market towards that audience? Why turn your characters into those people? And Karen Berger, whose entire foundation of her reputation as the founder of Vertigo is that she wanted to create the exact opposite of those kinds of characters and those kinds of stories. She wanted to make stories for everybody that hit a wider market of a wider audience of storytelling and characters. And now all she's doing is this divisive, segregating rhetoric of taking everybody and putting them in a box and only targeting them with those kinds of things that match those people. It's like she became everything that she said that she wanted to rail against. She's very much the political type. She's very much a politician.
It's crazy. Don't fall into the trap. When they say it's not just straight white boy comics anymore, they're trying to bait you in. It never was. That is a fucking lie. Don't fall into that stuff. If you've been a comic book reader your entire life, you know, I started later in life, you've seen that there has been a diverse readership. There's diverse characters. There's a wonderful tapestry as far as the comic book community. They're trying to divide everybody because that's their game plan. Don't follow into it. That's bullshit. And Karen Berger is a hypocrite because she had decades to make a change. She was in a position to do it, and she never did. She went for the least diverse pool of writers you could ever imagine.
She just loved those accents, though.